And it was a super experimental video. I was even on mushrooms and it was like me trying to capture this psychedelic experience. And I showed it to her and she was like, you know what? I think you actually might have some ability here because there's some, like, it's really messy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Votary Podcast. My name is Michael, and I'm going to be your host. Today, I'm pleased to announce that we have an Oscar-qualifying director whose work explores a strange overlap of human stories and environmental mysteries. Our guest, Spencer MacDonald, has joined us today to discuss creating branded content for tourism. Spencer, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So I'd like to begin our conversation by asking you if you could use a sentence to describe yourself as a director. What would that sentence be?
I would say it would have been different a year or 2 years ago or 3 years ago, but recently I was reading a book and the author said that his pen is dipped in sarcasm. And I think that stuck with me a lot. That's how I like to look at my work from here on out is somehow my cinematic eye is dipped in sarcasm.
And how has this viewpoint changed over time? Because, you mentioned it might have been different a couple years ago. I'm kind of curious to know about your journey as a director. How did you become one and how have you evolved since?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that to answer your first question, it was different before. I used to take the work much more seriously. I still take the work obviously very seriously, but the quality of the work also had a serious tone. And I think now I'm more interested in delivering you a serious message through a sarcastic tone so that you're not necessarily expecting where you're going to land. So that's how it's changed. Yeah, so after college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was never interested in film. I never studied film. It didn't even cross my mind until I had graduated from university. I went to San Diego State University, which I would not recommend for anybody. And I studied business, psychology, and interdisciplinary studies. So then after school, I was traveling and I ended up in the Himalayas for like 4 months. And then I traveled around India and it was there that I had a camera with me. And that was the first time that I realized like, oh, wow, this is the best way to sort of communicate myself, like to share not only my experiences, but also a feeling that I could create through imagery. Then I wanted to make a nonprofit organization. And to make the nonprofit, my first thought was, okay, I have to make a Kickstarter video. So I had a friend who was a filmmaker who was visiting. And I asked him, like, hey, can you help me learn how to edit and shoot video in like the very basic sense so I can make this Kickstarter video? And he was like, sure. So he did that. I was really grateful.
What was the target group you're trying to help with the nonprofit?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds so cringy when I say it now, but at the time I was like this very naive, 21-year-old or whatever, 22-year-old. And my idea was to have a nonprofit that would teach people without homes to play musical instruments. And I was teaching this man how to play the guitar. And then he stopped showing up. I don't know if she was executive director or the marketing person of the homeless organization. And she said, your ambition is right, but this idea is not going to work out because, these people need to meet their basic needs first before they can do something like a musical instrument. It actually provides them with an extra burden if they have an instrument. So like maybe come back to this in another form, but you should take your ambition elsewhere for now. And I was really bummed at first, but then I came out of that and I thought, okay, well, actually, in this process, I learned that I love making videos. So I started to make more experimental videos. And my mom, who is an artist, and she's always someone that I've respected very much in terms of her creative input on things, I made a video and I showed it to her. And it was a super experimental video. I was even on mushrooms when I made the video. And it was like me trying to capture this psychedelic experience. And I showed it to her and she was like, you know what? I think you actually might have some ability here because there's some, like, it's really messy. The whole thing is chaotic, but there's some feeling that you captured that feels very unique and personal. And I remember that. And then I showed it to my dad and he was like, oh, I hate this. This is a mess. Because I was back in my parents' house at that time. So those were like my critics besides my girlfriend at the time. Then my mom was like, you know what? You don't know what else you want to do with your life. Maybe you should try to see if you like filmmaking. So then I ended up going up to Portland, Oregon to intern with these documentary filmmakers. One of them was a friend of my mom, actually. And they were like, cool, you can come and intern, but we can't pay you. We don't have the funds to pay you. So I went to Oregon, did this internship part-time. And on the other part of my time, I was living on an organic farm doing this woofing experience. And it was an incredible experience living on this farm with like 10 other young people trying to figure their lives out. And I would be there in the evenings, on the weekends, and then I would go into Portland, like the city of Portland, to do this internship. I quickly kind of quit that internship because I realized the people were wonderful and I learned a lot from them. But after a certain point, I realized that I'm not so valuable to them other than doing sort of monotonous tasks like transcribing interviews or doing the documentation that they didn't have time to do. Because obviously the main creative work needs to be done by the filmmakers, and I wasn't one of them. So then I quit that because I realized, the best way I'm going to learn is just to make my own videos. So then I started making videos. At the time, my subject was farms. So I made a video about the farm I was living on. And that was the first, I spent like all summer making this film. But the farm was called Skyberry Farm. The video is like on YouTube or something. And I remember showing it to everybody on the farm when I finished it. And the farm guys who like ran the farm and lived there and owned it. And when it was over, they looked at me and they were like, that was awesome. And then also my parents were like, wow, you should keep going with this, And other people were just like, they gave me this feeling that I had some ability. So it was the encouragement that I needed, because I think if I didn't get that encouragement at that time, I would have given up. The next summer, I made a friend of mine, she was a photographer, and she was like, hey, I got some funding to go, not much funding, but just a little bit of funding to pay for a trip for us to go around different small organic farms in the Pacific Northwest. And I'd love if you want to come and make a video about it. But I shot it, and then I spent like 2 months editing it. I had this feeling when I was done that like, this is me. I put myself into this. It was one of the first times in my life where I really felt like I had expressed myself. And I never knew that feeling when I was younger. It didn't occur to me that there was value in this like artistic expression. I just knew the art world as a source of suffering also, because to see like my mom have no money from being an artist and blah, blah, blah. But then I put that video online. It was called Age of the Farmer. All the farming platforms shared it. Ended up getting a Vimeo staff pick, being on National Geographic, The Atlantic. The executive producer of a production company called Avocados and Coconuts, she called me and she was like, hey, a client of mine shared this with me, and I think you have a lot of talent. You're obviously very, very much a beginner, but I'm going to kind of follow you. I'm going to watch you and see what you do. So send me everything you do, and then maybe we can work together. And then myself and my photographer friend Ava went to Kenya, and we made another short documentary about Kenyan runners. And then I sent that to Dahlia, the executive producer of Avocados and Coconuts, and she was like, wow, this is great. I have a project that I think could be perfect for you. And it was a series of branded documentaries for Rafa, a cycling company. And that was my first like branded work that I did. And we made 6 films. The goal of the films was to make a portrait of cycling in different cities of the US that was through the eyes of a cyclist that's from there. And we spent like 6 months making that. And then 3 of the 6 of those also got Vimeo staff picks. And then from there, I started getting a lot of work.
And I want to circle back to working on a farm. Right now, I also work on a farm as well right now, and I've been shooting content for them too. So it's really
Amazing.
cool hearing it from someone in your shoes and who's able to capitalize on that opportunity and to be here speaking with me. So working on a farm, right, you're in nature all day, you're toiling, using your hands. You're very I think you're in touch with a very deep part of creativity, of like this creative essence that surrounds us. And your work with Swiss tourism, it takes place in nature. So I'm kind of curious to know how your experience working on the farm has translated to these jobs like in Switzerland or in Kenya, as you were saying, and how you capture nature to make it appealing for these companies and brands.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's when I became really fascinated with the small details of things. Because I would take my camera, I had a Panasonic GH4 at the time, and it had a crop sensor, and I had this zoom lens. So I was always working with a 100mm lens, essentially. And I would take it into little pockets of light between the plants, or it allowed me to kind of find beauty in details that I couldn't access with my eyes, actually. So I found that it was the first time that I could actually convey this magic of nature. And so then I spent all day kind of looking for different little aspects of nature to film, to try to show people. So I would play with time lapses of light and different speeds, different frame rates and stuff, different movements of the camera, different exposures. But I think as I grew up out of that, I also started to move back into the cities. Then I moved into Portland, left the farm. After that, I moved to Berlin.
So you say, right, you have to add all of these aspects in a 90-second video. What was your process like when creating this piece?
Yeah, that was one of the most freestyled pieces I've ever made, actually. So Switzerland Tourism, they wanted to make, I think it was 4 profiles, documentary style profiles of 4 people that are living somehow sustainably in Switzerland. So they picked out the protagonists, and we did the first 2. And the first 2 were very much traditional documentaries in a way. You know, there was like a voiceover, they're telling their story. I was trying to make the visuals a bit abstract and poetic, but the general storytelling style was one that we all know and what we see. Especially at that time, I would see a lot of stuff on Vimeo. It was like branded documentary stuff. And then we had like a pause before we did the second 2 films. And the second 2 films involved the character. One of the protagonists was this person, Ivano, who's in Even If It Takes a While. And the second protagonist was this activist named Rosemary, who's in Dear Travelers, actually. So then what happened was, so Switzerland Tourism loved the first 2 that we did. And then I said, okay, that's awesome. Now, would you be open to me trying to do, or not me, to us trying to tell the next 2 protagonist stories in a little bit more of a conceptual way, so that rather than them just telling their story, we try to enter into their mind a little bit and then craft a film that's like particular to them, and also then has an option to reach audiences in another way instead of people that want to just hear stories. So with Ivano, then I started having some calls with him, and I wanted to learn his story. He said that he had hiked across the Alps, like all the Alps, so that took like 3 months. And it was a life-changing experience for him. It took him like maybe a month of walking before he actually could kind of get in the flow of hiking, because he's an overthinker, as most of us are. So I found that really interesting, and I thought, okay, how can we like maybe condense that experience into this ad, you know? So I started having calls with him, and I started trying to get to know like what are the things that he thinks about, what are the specific thoughts. We didn't even figure out much of that until then. We just like went to the shoot. And we had picked out the location. There was a team of like 5 of us, I think, maybe 6 people maximum. And I was like, okay, let's get into your head. Let's try to do this inner monologue thing. So we started trying to do the inner monologue thing. I was like, read me your to-do list. And I had him write all these things out, like his to-do list and certain worries that would be recurring worries. That was also one of my first experiences learning how to actually capture VO in a way that sounds realistic. That didn't sound good. And then the sound guy, I think his name is Martin, he said like, oh, he'll tell you the list, you read his list, but you say it and he'll repeat it back to you, so you get it to sound natural. So we did that. That sounded great. And then when we were filming, I was looking for one item that would be the essential item that would like also follow onto the trail in this sort of surreal moment. And he had these boxes that he had brought with him, like moving from 3 times, that he had always intended to do something with. I think it was put pictures in. So then I thought, okay, that's kind of funny. It's so arbitrary. It's like the most banal thing that you can have on your to-do list. Like it doesn't really matter if you do it or not. So I thought that would be a fun focal point of the film, to have it as like the thing that goes onto the trail and is sort of the turning point for him.
And I was literally about to ask you about the boxes. That was a wonderful symbolic addition to it. And to see something like that, especially added into a commercial or branded content, I thought that was very remarkable and creative. I'm curious to know a little bit more about your experience. So what is your balance between directing, editing, and cinematography?
Yeah, I don't shoot anything myself anymore. I think the last time I shot something was probably 5 years ago. And I used to love to shoot. I didn't think I would ever want to give that up. I always saw myself as like a, one person show. But then once I started working with DPs, I realized, oh, like there's so many fantastic DPs out there who could shoot better than I can. And then it allows me to focus more on the overall vision of it. And it also becomes this great collaboration, if you trust the DP, not only in terms of framing and aesthetics, but also overall storytelling. I don't like to ever be on my own. I'm always leaning on people for help. Whoever's working with me on the project, I like to get them involved as much as I can so that everybody really gets excited about it. In terms of editing, I often edit myself even if it takes a while. I had done like a longer version of it myself that was like 4.5 minutes actually. And yeah, and I liked that version, but it was just way too long. And I couldn't figure out how to cut it down because I didn't want to kill any of my darlings, as I'm sure you know, and as all
Yeah.
filmmakers know. I asked another editor based in London, this guy, Tim Swaby, who's a fantastic editor. I asked him if he could cut it down, and he was like, sure, I'll give it a try. He cut it down to what it is now. So he made it, like without him, it wouldn't be what it is today. It wouldn't have reached anybody. I think it would have been too long. So that was a good lesson for me of collaborating in editing as well. Like I like to always get my hand on it a little bit because I there's certain little nuances that I like to do, like with sound design and transitions and stuff. But there's so many amazing editors. Well, actually, it's hard to find a great editor, I would say. But when you find a great editor, collaboration and that like assistance in telling the story is so important because I think if when I'm doing everything myself, directing and editing, I just get way too lost in the sauce, and it'll take me like maybe I'll end up getting somewhere really great, but it'll take me so long and I'll go through like serious ups and downs and question my whole purpose of life, you know? So,
You're kind of mentioning, you collaborating with a lot of people and sharing your creative vision with creating this product or like this piece for Swiss tourism. When working with the Swiss government, what was the process like between making sure their vision was brought to light while still reassuring that your vision was there and met at the same time?
well, that piece was a tricky one. We were all on the same page up until a certain point. I think this happens often, but this was an extreme example. After we did the first two short documentaries, everybody was happy for us on our team, for the agency, and then also for the client, the Switzerland tourism client. But they hadn't showed their CEO yet, actually. And then and I was like, okay, great, everybody's happy. So now let's do these two more conceptual films. And we did those, and it was very clear about what they were going to look like. Everybody was excited about it, and we made even if it takes a while, the longer version, and we shared it with the agency and our internal client. Switzerland Tourism wanted to show that they're supporting sustainability in that not only are the people that they're portraying living sustainable in some way, but you can access these amazing trailheads just by public transit, which is actually incredible. Like you could take a train and a series of buses and you can get to like the remote places of the Alps basically. So we made the film and then they liked it. And then they got their CEO involved and the CEO looked at it and he was like, I don't like this. This is it's way too moody. Like we don't want to make it seem like you could be in the Swiss nature and not be just having a great time. So at that point, they basically wanted to re-edit the whole project and go back to their original idea of like, it's just going to be him telling his story and just going to be in nature. So we did that. We re-edited it and had that version for them. And luckily I was able to release this version as my director's cut. So there's the client version has nothing in common with this except for the protagonists and the locations. Most of the commercials that we really love are director's cuts. It takes pretty brave creatives at the agencies and on the client side to release something that has a risk of being not liked. And I think all the good work that gets out there in any format, any artistic format, can potentially be strongly disliked by certain people. That's the risk of trying to make really interesting work. But that's what I always want to do that. So every project I work on, I will make my own version. Once they go a certain way and they say, okay, this is exactly what we want, and then okay, we do that. We give that to them as good as we possibly can. But then I always want to make my own version to have also to test my ideas out. Because when I go into a project, I'm usually trying to experiment with something slightly different in each project. And I need to know from my future if that experiment worked out. So even if I make a version that I'm never going to end up releasing, there's a lot of director's cuts that I've spent many days working on that I don't share with anybody. I just keep them to myself. But for me, yeah, in the vault, exactly. But it's helpful because it's all learning. I mean, I didn't go to film school, so for me, doing commercial projects is my film school. Don't tell clients that.
I didn't hear anything. And I mean, to that, right? Experience is currency. It's the best way that I learn, right? Through doing, because you can actually, learn about a process or learn about a device. But if you can't apply that knowledge is in your short-term brain. You don't understand the importance and the effectiveness of it. And so you were just mentioning, right? Dealing with clients, it might be troublesome because there's so many people in the mix. And I've seen one of your pieces called A Body Called Life. How you were able to capture those microorganisms, Spencer, I don't know, but that was so cool to watch. And I'm kind of curious to know, right? Like when you're working one on one, is it a different feel? Like when you're supposed to tell the story of one person, do you tend to gravitate more towards those opportunities?
That's interesting. I mean, well, first to your first question about how did we capture those microorganisms?
Yeah.
That was all James, the protagonist. He captured all that footage himself. But I think I am drawn towards a singular person for shorter stories because I think we want to connect. We only way we're going to be moved is if we get that story through a human narrative. Um, that's what I'm particularly drawn to is like how we can use filmmaking to change the world, although the world is pretty scary right now, and do it in a way that's cinematic and also human. And to do the human side, you need to connect it to people's stories. So I think that's why I've been drawn to like telling singular people's stories.
Yeah. And you're mentioning, right? Because that's, you also added the future part. From your perspective, how do you see AI impacting the realm of commercial filmmaking?
Commercial side, I don't know. I mean, I see production companies making like full AI ads now, and they're like proud of it, which I find funny. I think we're quickly going to get to the point where there's so much AI used that nothing impresses us anymore. Like, the new thing I saw with Runway, where it's like you're in a room and you can make the lights come on, you can make things disappear, you can change the room to a snowy field or whatever. Like all this stuff that would have been incredible 2 years ago. And this stuff, it's all like, it's cool when it's a novelty. But once it actually starts being used more and more, I think we're going to be just so saturated with like visual tricks that it's just going to come back down to like, what's the concept? What's the story? What are you trying to do? And how can you do that in a way that feels novel? I think it's always the same. I mean, there's a small part of me that's definitely afraid of how much of the industry can go away if AI gets used a lot. But
I totally get it. And I also am appreciative that you're trying to strike that balance, right? And you're not trying to pose one side against the other. I don't think AI can replace authenticity. And
yeah,
truly capturing people's stories is like as authentic as it gets if you do it right.
yes,
And that's
totally.
why I would say I'm more optimistic for, true filmmaking that's trying to get at the core of our humanity, which is literally rooted in storytelling, right? That's how we've passed information since we could talk, since we could
Yeah,
store information.
but the imperfection that is human made can never be replaced. If AI makes a mistake, it's not interesting. But if we make a mistake, if we do some weird transition in a film, there's something interesting. But if AI does it, we don't care.
Spencer, I'm kind of curious to know about your future goals and future vision as a filmmaker.
I mean, there's the commercial side of my work, which is how I make a living, and I enjoy it a lot creatively. It's like I feel very blessed that I'm able to do that as a job and learn and hone my craft. I'm interested in slowly becoming a master of filmmaking, over the years, like to hone in my vision and just the same way like a piano player becomes a master over time. And I've been also making steps in my personal work, like away from, like I started with very much documentary stuff, and I've been making steps more into narrative. And the next thing, my goal is I'm working on a feature fiction film, actually, which is, I don't want to say too much about it because I don't have like my pitch line down, but it has to do with out of body experiences and near death experiences, and the idea of how lucky and random it is that we're born into the bodies that we're in.
Good pitch as it is.
Yeah. So I'm working with a very dear colleague of mine, and we've been writing this film where we have pretty much the storyline worked out by now, but it's not yet in script format. And I have no idea how we're going to get it made. Obviously, we'll need a couple $1 million or whatever it costs. But so we're just taking it one step at a time. But that's my goal. If I can get that made in the next 5 years, I would be living on a cloud. Thanks, man. That would be amazing.
Yeah, Spencer, and before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to say to the audience?
I think the most important thing in filmmaking is really trying to be yourself, like trying to express your own voice. Because you can make something. When I was started out, my goal was like, how can I make something very professional? And then you realize like it can be, you'll see like a car commercial or something, and it's like the highest level of perfection, the way it's shot, the way it's put together, it's like perfect, but you can't tell who did it. And for me, I think what's most interesting when I watch something is like, can I feel the person behind it? So I think that's what I think is most important, because then you will always have a place in the filmmaking world, especially with AI coming up, and everybody has something to say if they can tap into their voice and use it, you know.
And to me, that's the purest expression of creativity and of humanity. Spencer, I really want to thank for your time. I really appreciate your dedication to the craft, and as well as like how introspective you are. It really does go a long way.
Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
All right, guys, thank you for watching the Votary podcast. Again, my name is Michael. We're here. We love to talk with fellow filmmakers and collaborators. If you guys are interested in talking more, please feel free to reach out. All right, guys, signing off.